previous video about this engine, I showed you how I determined that the crankshaft was in a good condition. The brand new bearings that somebody installed already were the corresponding ones for the crankshaft size, and everything was okay there, but the liners were tapered and out of round, so I ordered new liners, pistons, piston rings, and the whole set there. I ordered some other parts for the engine, of course, and by the time the parts come, I started preparing the engine for rebuilding. But before I show you that, I'm gonna show you quickly all the projects that we have currently in the shop. Here is the TR6 that I'm currently restoring. That's the TR4 engine that I am rebuilding. I'll show you in a little bit the car that it will go in. So that's the TR4. Here I have the rest of the parts for the same engine. And that's the TR4 that it's gonna go in. Belongs to my boss. It has an engine in it, but it's not in very good condition, so we're gonna just rebuild the other one and swap them. Then I have my Spitfire here, waiting its time to be restored. A customer's TR6. We just fixed the frame for him, replaced the cross members here, both sides. Maybe we're gonna do something on the engine, we'll see. And there you can see the body. That's its body. Not sure what we're gonna do on it. And last but not least, this 1953 Ford F100. So some interesting cars in our shop. But now back to the engine of the TR4. So I started by cleaning up the block outside and inside, but first outside I removed all the old paint. It appeared that it had two coats of paint. It was initially orange, and then somebody painted it black, but as far as I can see, there was absolutely no primer on it, so the paint was coming off like very easy. I used a big angle grinder with a wire wheel on it for the places that I could reach, and for the corners I used a die grinder with a little wire wheel on it. It took me an hour or so, but at the end it looked really clean. I started removing those studs a couple of days ago, but it appeared that some of them were really stubborn, so I soaked them into WD-40 and I left them sitting for a couple of days, and they were still stubborn. Here you can see the first one took me a lot of time to remove. The two nuts that I locked together didn't want to stay, so I had to lock a third one on top of the two, and this time it was still hard, but it worked. The rest of them came a little bit easier, not all of them, but most of them. I noticed that the ones that were deep, you know how there are 4 of them that are like 4 inches longer than the other ones, and they go deep into the block. These were the ones that were really stubborn. So the last one was one of them. You will see now how I spent again a lot of time taking it out. I think again I had to lock 3 nuts, and with the long arm I went back and forth until it started moving, and then finally I was able to unscrew it. But even when it was out of the threads, it still didn't want to come out. There was a lot of rust around. I had to pull hard until I pull it out. Then I cleaned the surface with 400 sandpaper to get rid of all the remainings of any gaskets and debris there. Then I took a straight edge and I checked the surface for flatness. Of course, that's not the most precise way, but I think it's good enough. So it looked okay. And next I started cleaning the water jacket inside because there was a lot of rust. With this tool I couldn't reach too low, so I borrowed from one of my colleagues a long reach die grinder, and that and with brass wire wheel it worked very well. It was important to use brass wire so I don't damage the surface where the figure 8 gaskets are gonna go. And this is how it looks after I cleaned one of the chambers. It is satisfying for me. And this is the other chamber for the other 2 cylinders, which I still have to clean. While I was self-educating in internet about rebuilding this engine, I figured that it's a little bit of a challenge to remove this rear main bearing cap for many people. And I wanted to show you my way of removing it. I just bought 2 wrenches to it and shake it a little bit, use them as handles, and it comes out very easy. Next I cleaned all the paint from the oil pan. Here you can see the remainings of the orange paint under the black paint. But I cleaned all kinds of paint there with my angle grinder with the wire wheel. And then for the places where I couldn't reach with the angle grinder, I used the little die grinder. I also cleaned the timing cover the same way. Removed the old oil seal. And the last part to be cleaned was the front engine plate, which had a lot of remainings of silicone, which was used instead of a gasket. A very important part, at least for me, was to retap all the threads on the block, because there were some bolts that came out really hard. I'm guessing the threads inside are rusty and dirty, so I just pulled out my top set and cleaned all the threads all over the block. I took some extra time to chase all the threads, but I'm really happy I did that because it's worth. Some of them were really bad, in a really bad condition. The ones that concerned me the most were the ones for the studs for the cylinder head. I wanted to clean these very well because you saw how the studs were really seized inside. But my tap wasn't deep enough for the deep ones. You see how deep are they? So I took a socket from my socket set, which fitted inside the hole. 11/32 fits perfectly this tap. Surprise. Only this hole was a little bit too rusty and the socket wasn't fitting inside, so I had to clean it with the file, but of course I didn't go too deep, so I didn't touch the threads. And then with the tap into the socket with the extension and then a ratchet, I managed to go and chase even the deep threads that are buried deep into the block. I didn't use any lube on purpose, just because I didn't want to get the whole block oily after I cleaned it, because my paint wasn't gonna stick after. But I wasn't making a new thread, I was just chasing the old ones, so it wasn't needed, I think. Okay, this head is not the head from the engine that I'm currently rebuilding. This head came off the engine that is still in the car. So what happened to this engine was it was recently rebuilt due to excessive smoking and leaking from the rear crankshaft seal. So it was rebuilt by somebody, but unfortunately after it came back together, it was smoking even more and leaking even more. So I don't know what he did, so I didn't want to touch that engine. That's why I'm rebuilding the other one. But the head of this engine went to a machine shop for resurfacing and valve job. So I believe that the head, at least the head, is properly done, because the valves look great on this side. Here, even though the car ran after rebuilding the engine not more than half an hour, there's a lot of carbon already here. So I'm gonna clean this up, and I'm gonna consider this head a good head because it was done in a machine shop. It wasn't done by this guy who rebuilt the engine. So I'm gonna use this head with an engine that I'm rebuilding right now, and hopefully this time it's gonna work better. See? That's a gasket maker. That's what he did. He put gasket maker on the exhaust manifold. Smart. So I used razor blade to remove the rest of the gasket maker that was on the head. Cleaned up the surface very well. Did the same for the valve cover gasket. Again, it was glued there with gasket maker, which is fine for this gasket. And then with the die grinder I cleaned the external part of the head. I blew it with the blower to remove all the dust and everything, and then I washed it literally with brake cleaner. That removed all the debris of it, and also degreased it so I could paint it after. Dried it up with the blowgun again. And then I masked the surfaces that I didn't want to paint. It is very important when working with masking tape to use safety goggles. Just joking. I also masked the engine, all the surfaces that I didn't want to be painted. I put the front engine plate and timing cover temporary on the block just so I don't paint the surfaces inside. And then I primed it. Couple of coats, the head, and all the parts that I had at that time. But the rest of the parts that needed to be cleaned and painted were still on the engine that was still in the car. So by the time these ones dried up, I started removing the engine from the car. Once the engine was out, I removed the parts that I needed, like the water pump, the pulley from the front of the crankshaft, the oil filter assembly, and then I primed them all. After the primer, I'm gonna paint some of them black, some of them silver. For example, the pulleys are gonna be silver, parts of the starter and generator are gonna be silver, but for now I'm painting everything black. And then I painted also the cylinder head and the block and oil pan. This is a special high heat engine paint, so hopefully it's gonna stay there longer than the other paint that somebody used a long time ago. And with this, all the preparations for the rebuilding were done. In the next video, I'm gonna start assembling it, and I'll see you then. For now, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. See you in my next video.